And it may not be that you have a disability or that you have a different a physical condition or a neurodiversity or anything like that, but you can be vulnerable in your own way and talk about the things that are personal to you. It's sort of similar to, I do a lot of animal rescue work, and one of the best signs that you can see when you introduce two animals together of almost any species is that they
Awe Genge, this is Mental Matters, hosted by Asego Toto.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asego Toto. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
What is neurodiversity?
It's a wonderful question. Thank you. So neurodiversity simply is a medically visible and or diagnosable difference in how the brain processes information. So that has a very broad umbrella of diagnoses associated with it, from even epilepsy and traumatic brain injury, which affects the neurological pathways, all the way to autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and then even over into the mental health diagnoses such as obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, anxiety, etc. So anything that alters the brain's typical pathways.
So, as much as we could talk about but with the disability, we cannot run away from the word inclusion. And as much, what does inclusion mean to you?
I'm sorry?
Did you hear my question?
I didn't know. Sorry.
I was asking that what does inclusion mean to you?
What does inclusion mean to me? Really, it just is the idea and the practice that everyone is embraced in a way that is natural, comfortable, and healthy for them. And whether that's in the workplace or in society, that's ultimately what inclusion is. We want people to be able to be healthy, happy, and to be able to be themselves.
Recently, today it was a conference, a colloquium here at Nelson Mandela University, whereas I would say other higher institutions of education were on the conversation of redefining inclusion, accessibility within the higher institution of education. So, in a way, my question revolves around how can we as the society, as you know, that some disability are seen as a stigma around, and it is not easy to talk about certain disabilities. So how can we as society, as some people that are advocating about disability, mental health, send a message that breaks out the stigma? It's okay to talk about your disability. Yeah, that's my question.
I think that's a beautiful question, actually, because I like the train of thought that we have an obligation to, and that's very accurate. One of the biggest things that's created good psychological safety which, by the way, just simply means that people feel free to express themselves and to dissent and ask questions without fear of reprisal. So that, that would branch into disclosing and discussing disability. And one of the biggest aspects that creates that whenever I speak or teach or go consult is that I am vulnerable first. I typically start my talks by discussing my own diagnoses and what's going on. And so, I'll start off a conversation and say, hi, my name is Katherine, and just to let you know a little bit about me, I have multiple neuro and physical diversities, ranging from bipolar to and OCD over to I have a seizure disorder that's associated with many strokes. And I just sort of dive into that and I talk about it a little bit. And it helps people to feel more comfortable because they're like, oh, this person understands, they get it. And it may not be that you have a disability or that you have a different a physical condition or a neurodiversity or anything like that, but you can be vulnerable in your own way and talk about the things that are personal to you. And it's sort of similar to I do a lot of animal rescue work. And one of the best signs that you can see when you introduce two animals together of almost any species is that they expose their bellies to each other, right? Because that's the vulnerable part. So this is the human equivalent of showing our bellies, right? And
Yeah.
say that this is a safe space. So a very big part of it is to create that vulnerability. Then another big part of it is to respond in curiosity, not ego. So we all have a naturally occurring ego mechanism. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It is nothing to be ashamed about. It is our brain's need to be correct. And when our brain receives conflicting information or confusing or emotionally upsetting information, we tend to respond in ego, which is that ego mechanism. And I don't mean ego like, oh, I'm the best person that ever lived. It's that our brain needs to be right. And so it immediately begins to throw up defenses and we become argumentative and not receptive. So the other piece of that is to instead of responding with your comment, your explanation as to why you're right, instead of that, respond with questions and curiosity, such as, tell me more about that. Okay, is it okay if I ask questions so that I can better understand? Things like this, that is a much more helpful response, and that will create that psychological safety that you're looking for.
That's powerful. I wanna lie, that's powerful what I said. Before we dive deep more on disability and inclusion, I would like to hear your story in terms of how have you dealt with your own disabilities, your own neuro disabilities, and the invisible ones.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So I I have multiple neurophysical disabilities. In fact, I've been joking lately that I talk a lot about my 6 invisible disabilities, and my doctor keeps trying to sneak another one in, and I've told her I've cut it off. I'm only going to have 6. We're not having any more in there in the group. Um, right? They keep trying to get 7 and maybe 8 in there. I'm like, nope, 6 it is. Um, so I and the earliest most visible one was my obsessive compulsive disorder. My mother very first realized it when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And my parents had a beautiful response, and I am so proud of them. And I think one of the most beautiful things, that probably the most beautiful thing that they've done for me in my life, was how they responded to all of my diversities. And they just took the attitude of, well, this is how her brain works. No big deal. We're just going to steer into it. And so they would respond to me. And again, with that curiosity, they would ask me, okay, when you're doing this, what are you accomplishing? What basically, what's going on inside of you, so that they can understand how to accommodate me and how to work with me and how to teach me how to accommodate myself. And so they really spent time with intentional parenting and helping me grow from that standpoint. Then we started having some of the physical and mental health diagnoses as well, such as I have, the bipolar, which manifested kind of surprisingly early in me. And they took me to a brilliant first they tried a counselor, which that went okay, but then they found a brilliant psychologist and paired me with her. And I chose, because the medications at the time were not good. They were highly addictive, had a lot of very bad side effects. They're better now. Um, but at the time, I decided not to medicate for those reasons, especially at my very young age. But I still knew the importance of treatment. And so I underwent the process of learning to take charge and take care of myself. And that took years. I don't want to make that sound. It took years to become successful at that, but it worked. And now I can successfully monitor myself and understand what's going on with me. I can accommodate myself. So that was part of the journey. I started having the physical problems. And that got very hard. And once it was the strong combination of the physical and the neuro, that got a little challenging. And we started just, it was just hit or miss, right? And learning, what to do and how to balance out what my body needed. I love to go 90 to nothing. So learning to take breaks was really hard for me. But I've learned how to do it and to still maintain productivity. But then one of the most interesting aspects came when my seizures started. So I've had um, TIAs or mini strokes since I was 17 years old periodically. They became more frequent and then added a seizure element several years ago, starting about 5 or 6 years ago. And that was very hard to deal with because there was a lot of limitations, and there was a lot of readjusting how I had to do things. I finally had to take medicine on an ongoing basis, although I chose a natural one. I take CBD on a daily basis, and it helps tremendously. Um, and then I started even having physical manifestations. So my face now it's a little hard to see on screen, but I have some kind of permanent lines and things like that from this on my left side where the seizures happen. And I don't like it. I've gotten a little pouty pants about it occasionally. Um, but and then the physical differences, the things that my bodies can and cannot do. But really it's always just a matter of shifting how you take care of yourself. And what I found is that when you start to make these pivots and when you start insisting that other people give you the grace that you need and start really truly self-advocating for what it is that you need and letting people know this is just it. And I say it kindly and with respect, but I just let people know this is how I operate, period. There's not a question mark to it. And when I started doing that, I became more productive, healthier, and I was able to find that better harmony of self-care. And it's worked out tremendously well. And my mental health improved as well because I wasn't so downtrodden because I couldn't do the things that I wanted to do.
Hmm. How did you accept it? How accept that you had to live with these six disabilities, invisible disabilities?
Um, some of them I've had for so long that they're just a part of me, and it's not really an accepting thing. And because of how my parents responded on the neuro side of things, it's never bothered me. Even the bipolar, it's and the OCD, it's never bothered me because that's just how I am. That's my brain. I don't really know any different. It doesn't affect me. There is no accepting. That's just me. And my parents always treated it the same way. On the physical side, um, it was really learning that I didn't need to I didn't need to plan my life, and that's where the pain came from. So for instance, one of the physical problems I had led me to not be able to have kids, and I always thought I would have kids. And so when I realized that all of the pain was coming from these expectations that I had set of myself, that there was not that I could be just as productive and happy without children. And I started living that life and I was like, now I'm really happy. Like there's nothing wrong. I love my life. At this point, I wouldn't want kids. That sounds awful to me 'cause I'd have to give up so many wonderful things. It was the expectations. And I think it was the same thing for other physical aspects as well. It's just like, okay, this is irritating. I have to change a few things, but it's just things that were habits or that were expectations, and that's no big deal. So now I have people ask me these questions about, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, I have literally no idea because I've learned that, you know, following your missions is the thing. I follow my missions of inclusion, integrity, and innovation. That's it. Outside of that, who knows what I'll be doing? Who knows? And that's part of accepting it, is accepting that expectations are, it's okay to let them go. It's okay not to have expectations of yourself. You need to have missions, you need to have a purpose, but it's okay to let go of these expectations on yourself. And then it just is what it is. Everybody's got their stuff. You know?
And I feel like as much as we can talk about acceptance, but eventually my second question is disclosing. How did you disclose your disability? As I've said earlier, a disability, I would say, is considered a stigma. So how did you disclose it
Yes.
with, I would say, friends?
Oh, yeah. So disclosing is such an interesting process. So at first, so my first way of disclosing was kind of overwhelming to people because I would just blurt out what was going on with me. And people would be so awkward and not know what to do with that information. They were like, I would just meet somebody and I would do something. I go, oh yeah, that's just my bipolar. Don't worry about that. I'm bipolar 1. I have manic, I have depression. It's okay. And they're just like, what? Well, it's like, what? Who just says that like that, you know? So I had to dial it back a little bit. Um, and learn to say it in a way that was productive. And at the time, it was actually manic depression, not bipolar. But anyway, so I was a little overwhelming. I would talk about my OCD like it was just, like my pinky finger, like it was just no big deal. And I was like, okay, no, this is weird. So then, I dialed it back, and then I started. I have a really strong perception with people's responses, and even what they're trying to hide from me. I can immediately see through it, and I can see watching them what they're actually feeling, what they're actually responding to. And so I started paying attention to that and learning to say things in a way that was productive, because what I wanted was for them to be comfortable with it and to see that I was comfortable. And so I started, and it's not that their response was wrong, it's kind of jarring to have somebody just blurt something like that out at you. So I started then finding productive ways. So now the way that I disclose, there's a few different ways. One is that if I know that something's about to happen, for instance, if I'm going to be having seizure activity, and sometimes that's not a full, seizure, it could just be, facial tics, things like that. So I'll say things like, okay, so I'm giving a Zoom class today. You may see the left side of my face that I'll be doing some winking. I'm not trying to have a date with you. That's just my seizure activity. I'm okay. I'm healthy. So like I decompress them with a little bit of humor, but then or something cute. If it's one of my other health conditions, I'll say, oh, my heart's a flutter today. My husband walked by me. I love him so much. My heart's being a little funky today. I'll say something cute, to set the mood and the emotion. Then I give them the information that I am safe, because that's a big part of it. People become worried that you're not safe. And that makes them uncomfortable. They don't know what to do. It's a panic response of, how do I help? How do I help? And so you let them know, I'm okay. I do not need anything. Or if you do, you tell them what the steps are of how to help. And then I just go, okay, and it's no big deal. We're going to keep on rocking. And then I just dive into it. And then their mind has decompressed and we're okay. So that's one kind of method that I use. Another one is that I like to be very forthcoming and let people know before an issue comes up. I'll just kind of mention to somebody casually, like, oh, just FYI, I have, the seizure disorder, this bladder disorder, I have OCD, whatever it is. And it's no big deal. This is how it helps me. This is, if it's one of my neurodiversities, this is how it helps me. You may see some of these things. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. I got it. So the preemptive approach also works. And then you have the situations, and I haven't run into this in many years because now I'm on the consulting side. But you have actually, I'm going to backtrack that. The ones that I use for my consulting on my business side is often that I state my boundaries without necessarily explaining why. So what an employer or friend or whoever, or an educator, whoever needs to know, what they need to know is what you need and how you need it, not so much the why. So you don't always need to tell people why. You can tell them what it is that you need and how you need it without anything else, right? You don't have to necessarily give your diagnosis. And that's a lot of what I do now. That's a lot of what I recommend for the work workplace. But then I've also done the bit of, in the workplace, having, making sure that when I disclose, that I send a follow-up email about that, and I CC myself on it so that way there's written communication and there's also written documentation that they've been made aware of everything that I need.
So when you tell people that you have these multiple invisible disabilities, how do they react?
Yeah. I get different responses. So, and one of the things that I always teach people when I'm teaching them how to respond to other people is don't project your response onto them. So, for instance, when I've talked about the hysterectomy, when I had my uterus removed, people go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "Why? I'm healthier." That's a weird response. It's weird. You're not happy that I'm healthier. Like, please, like, what is that? That's very bizarre. So, be careful with that. I've had people with the OCD, they're like, "Oh, I have that." I'm like, "No, you don't." And they'll tell me some little habit they have or something. I'm like, "Yeah, that could be compulsory. That could be a habit that you have or a tick that you have, but that is not the same thing as obsessive compulsive." So you get the people that discredit what you have. A very good friend of mine has ADHD, and she is often told, "Oh, no, you don't have that," or, "Oh, oh, that's a thing that all of us have a little bit of." And it's a really rude response. I don't get that one a lot, but I've seen that a lot, and it's so ugly. It's such an ugly response to discredit somebody's experience. But I think part of it is that we've, put some language into our day-to-day lives that are that kind of discredits it. Like people will go, "Oh, ADHD moment," when they just kind of forget something. I'm like, "Nope, that's not what that is." Um, So I think that that's part, but you get that response. I get people that are like way overly concerned. A lot just like they go especially with women, but I've had it happen with men too. They're just like way over concerned. They dive so deep into like, "Oh my God, what's going on? Are you dying?" Like they have so many like intrusive questions and they just kind of bombard you with all these questions and wanting to understand. So that's why I've started when I do tell people, I go ahead and give the explanation to avoid that because it gets so weird so quick. I've been asked very bizarre questions. Like I I've had people I literally one of my favorite ones I got of all time was, "Does this make you more dumb?" Seizures. I was like, "What?" And she goes, "Well, like does your brain stop working?" And I'm like, "Okay, that's a better question." And, and so I kind of talk it through it. So you get really bizarre questions. And I think that's part of why people avoid disclosure. It's not even like with friends and family, it's not like they're gonna be rejected this time. It's the annoyance of it. It's like, what? Like, what is this question? And you have to deal with all of that. So yeah, it gets awkward. You get a lot of awkward response. And then you do get some hate. I've had one of the most interesting, I once was on a meeting, and this is a virtual meeting with a lot of people on it. And this guy was talking about how he would never hire somebody with bipolar. And I just started laughing out loud. And he goes, "Why are you laughing at me? It's not funny. I'm very serious about this." And I go, "Oh, it's hilarious because you tried to hire me twice." And he just froze. Like he did not know what to do. And I go, "Yeah, I have bipolar 1. I'm pretty open about it. I'm kind of surprised you didn't know." And like I kind of like talked about it. I said, and we had like a whole conversation about it, like right there in front of everybody. And it was rude, but to me it was funny because he had tried to hire me. So like, "Well, you're full of it. You just don't know what you're talking about." But so the ignorance response, and I think that's the most detrimental, is the ignorance response.
Yeah, because I remember when I had an interview with a friend of mine who is also disabled. She is using a wheelchair. So she spoke about these things of policymakers, whereas they don't include people who are disabled, and that creates a problem when it comes to inclusion. Whereas, for example, if there is steps there are stairs she wants to go to a class, but she can't go up because of the stairs. I feel like ignorance you have ignorance when you don't understand someone else's disability. So yeah, and
100%.
the thing I can say is that I really enjoy listening to people such as yourself who has so many disabilities. They inspire me. They motivate me. You really motivate me, and being being able to open up about the disability that takes a lot. And also, it is not easy. I don't lie. It is not easy. It is not easy.
Right.
I would say to me and probably half of the audience, I can speak with them for them. It's not easy to talk about their own disabilities.
It's not. It's weird. And actually for me, it's not that I'm ashamed of it or feel awkward about it. It's that I don't like to go that deep about myself. That was so hard to learn. That vulnerability was so hard to learn.
Mm.
But I realized that I needed it to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So I had to practice like getting really personal. Like I don't mind, telling my disabilities or disclosing them, but getting really personal about them took a lot of practice. So like if anybody out there wants to, get into this work or wants to be an advocate or wants to speak up for themselves, it's okay that you need to practice. Like you're not alone. That's literally everybody I've spoken to that's a disability advocate or that's a neurodiverse advocate or any kind of inclusion advocate. It- you have to practice that level of vulnerability and you have to practice not getting irritated when people don't know. And that's hard. It's hard because it affects you personally, but you're not alone there. So don't feel bad.
As much as I want to ask you more questions, and I think I'm just enjoying the conversation, being able to learn a lot from you, being able being able to be comfortable with 8 invisible disabilities. That's
So
something
many.
something else. It is.
Now remember, we're limiting it to 6. We're not going to the full 8. We're gonna stick to 6.
That takes a lot. So before we close off, do you have anything to say to the audience? Something that might be motivational, something that might be
Yeah.
being able to accept them, something that could touch their souls that on accepting their own disabilities.
Number 1 is encourage people to respond in curiosity, not ego. Work with them on that. And if you want help with that, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. But also, when it comes to yourself, just remember that we are naturally designed so that if there's a struggle in one area, there's a strength somewhere else. Every person is designed that way. So, yes, you have pain, you have struggle, you have disability in one area, but that means that you are powerful in another. And remember to focus on that power. And yes, we must take care of the disability. We have to nurture that and strengthen it where we can, accept it where we must, and always take care of it. But focus on your power and the awesome things that you have to offer because trust me, you have something to give.
That's powerful. Everything that you're saying, it's powerful. I don't lie. I don't lie. You inspire me. Actually, you inspire me to do more work.